guys, it's Kelly here again and welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to another bookish related video. Today I decided to do a mid-year wrap-up, which is going to be me talking about all of the books that I read in the year 2021 from January to June. So far for this year, I have read 10 books and I am currently in the middle of 2. I'm going to list out all of the books I'm going to be mentioning in this whole video, so I will also put timestamps in the description bar down below. So if you want to hear about a particular book and you want to skip my opinion about a certain book that you don't care about, you can use those to navigate forward in this video. Books that I'm going to be talking about are Aurora Rising by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman, Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, The Outpost by Dmitry Gluchovsky, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, Walking to Aldebaran by Adrian Tchaikovsky, Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes, This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El Mohtar, Every Heart a Doorway by Shannon Maguire, An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson, The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and the two that I am currently reading are Get a Life Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbard and A House on the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. So now let's just get into it. The first book that I read this year, I read in January, and it is Aurora Rising by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. This one is a YA sci-fi. I did a dedicated review for it while doing a digital fan art of it. So if you'd like to check it out and hear my thoughts more about it in the review, I will link it in the description bar down below or in the cards. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. It is, I think I mentioned, a young adult sci-fi. It follows Aurora, who is a teenage girl from, I guess, our time a little bit here on Earth. She is sent on a mission to join her father at a faraway colony on a faraway distant planet. However, something happens while she's on the ship and she ends up being frozen in time and waking 200 years in the future. She encounters a group of space cadets who save her and are supposed to figure out what happened to her and how this whole thing came to be. And in the process of doing so, they discover that she is not what she seems to be and the mission that they're on is not what it seems to be. And a whole lot of things start happening from there on. Overall, really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars and I will definitely be continuing the series. Next up, I read Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, and I listened to this as an audiobook and I DNF'd it at the 60% mark. This was just not for me. This year, I decided to give books that I wouldn't necessarily gravitate towards a chance, and this was one of them. I knew that this was a romance when I went into it, and I also knew that it was a Greek mythology retelling of the myth of Achilles. And while I did enjoy the concept and I loved the writing style and also the narration was absolutely stunning and beautiful, I just really couldn't get into it and I kept finding myself bored and wondering where I am. And the most that I could push to was the Trojan War, which I hoped would be more interesting, but unfortunately that was just it for me. Since I read more than half of it, I am willing to rate it. At first I was going to give it 3 stars, but I am lowering my rating to 2 stars just because as the months go by and I think about it, it just kind of makes me angry and put off of the book, so it doesn't get more than 2 stars from me. The main issues that I have were not so much with the romance, which is, just to mention, very insta-lovey and kind of doesn't make sense, but it's just there. And the main issue that I had was not with the romance, but with the characterization of Achilles. And he was made to look very dumb and naive, and I really didn't appreciate that. Mostly because, yes, I understand that he is a very strong warrior and he's like the dumb jock, and that's kind of like a trope. But I just feel like it was weird. He was made out to be very naive and kind of like a lost little puppy. And I don't know who finds that hot in a guy, but I certainly do not. So that was my main issue. Overall, kind of boring, even though the writing was beautiful. Apparently, it gets better and heartbreaking towards the end. I couldn't get to it, so... Next up in March, I read The Outpost by Dmitry Gluchovsky, and I really loved this book. I gave it 4 stars. It is a It is a post-apocalyptic book about zombies, basically, even though they're never named zombies, but kind of what it's hinting towards. Something horrible happened, and all towns are kind of communities that are cut off from everyone else, and the government is kind of controlling everything and keeping them safe. So it's a zombie story, and I really loved it. His writing style is very unique. The narration was absolutely phenomenal, which makes sense because as far as I understood this book was made into specifically for a audiobook series, which was really cool. It definitely grabbed my interest, and it was very easy to go through because everything was kind of episodic, and it made it very fast to go through it. One thing that I would note here is there are a few religious themes, and they're handled in maybe not a very great way. So if that's something that would be a problem for you, I would definitely recommend looking through other reviews and figuring out if it's something that would bother you. Personally, I made mental notes, but it didn't bother me enough for me to stop reading the book. In the month of April, I listened to 2 audiobooks. In April, I listened to The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I actually really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars, and this is the second book that I've listened to from Taylor Jenkins Reid. I listened to Daisy Jones and the Six last year, I believe, and I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed this one as well. Evelyn Hugo is about a very famous movie star, a starlet in the 60s who is basically like Marilyn Monroe. She is scandalous. Everybody wants to know about her life, her love life in particular, and she has been married 7 times, so it's been always a complete mystery who was the love of her life and how exactly her love life got to the point where she has 7 husbands. And it's very interesting. The character is very unlikable, which is something also shared in the Daisy Jones and the Six. And I really found myself enchanted by her story and her storytelling, and the ending just completely broke my heart, but also it was beautiful and amazing. So I had a very small issue with Evelyn Hugo's story, and that was that because I believe this is a debut novel for Taylor Jenkins Reid, I feel like she kind of wanted to include a lot of themes in here that would make it more marketable or more jarring, I suppose, and will get people interested. So there's a lot of talk about abuse, there's domestic abuse, there's a bit of sexual abuse, there's predatory characters, there is alcoholism and drugs, there is mention of HIV, there's mention about sexuality, there's mention about all these different things and themes that are very important and should be discussed in books. But what I didn't particularly like about this whole idea of all these different themes is that it kind of felt like a checklist where you have to talk about certain things and you put a little mark every time you mention a certain topic, but you never really dive into it and you never really discuss it in a prominent way. Especially, I feel like the alcoholism and the domestic abuse were something that was very badly handled, in my opinion, in this particular book, and that's something that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. If you are afraid of spoilers, I will put a little spoiler thingy here on the screen. When it disappears, you can continue listening to me. The thing that I had with the domestic abuse is that it was kind of blamed on alcoholism, and when her husband was cured of alcoholism, he was no longer abusive. That was something that I really didn't like because neither of the topics were discussed, and it was kind of a cop-out. So that's kind of why I couldn't give this one 5 stars, because I did really love it, but that particular thing and all of the other themes that were not handled as prominently and that were kind of used as a platform to elevate a specific topic, which again, the topic is fine, let's discuss it, but don't use all of these other equally important things that we should be talking about in books and in pop culture as a stepping stone to just bring forth the one specific one that you want to talk about. I feel like it just makes the other topics seem less important, and I'm sure that the author was not trying to do that. So that's the only thing that I kind of had a little note in my head about in this book. But overall, as I said, I enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend it. Even for people who don't read contemporary and who don't read romances, this was definitely something that I really enjoyed. And I would recommend. Next up was Walking to Aldebaran, which was from Adrian Tchaikovsky, and I listened to it as an audiobook. It was a very short one, I believe it was like 2 or 3 hours, and I was cleaning out my closet when I was listening to it, so I needed something to keep my mind occupied as I was working, and this one did its job. I gave this one 2 stars. It is a sci-fi about... what is it even about? It's about our character who was on a research mission on a faraway planet. Some events happen and he gets separated from his team, and you're following him around as he slowly, I guess, goes into madness. And I'm not gonna say much more just because it's going to be a spoiler, but this was very weird and I really can't say that I appreciated it very much. It was nicely written, but it was just not my cup of tea, and it's kind of not what I expected. And it gave me something to do, but overall, I don't think I would recommend this book very much. Go into it at your own risk. Next book that I finished was Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. I gave this book 4 stars, and this is a classic, I believe, sci-fi. This follows our main character Charlie, who has an IQ of 36, and he undergoes an operation that is supposed to make him smart. The operation works and he becomes a genius, and it kind of follows his journey from becoming a genius to whatever is next in life. I'm not gonna say much more because it's going to be a spoiler, but I really enjoyed this book. It made me tear up and even cry a few times. It has some very heavy things mentioned here and there. It's very good. It's very human, and you really feel for the character, and sometimes it makes your heart break, especially at the end. The end just completely broke me. I think I sobbed like a little child, but I really loved this book. The only reason why this is not a 5 stars for me is because it's a little bit old and there are a few word usages that are not particularly PC, I suppose, and that's the only thing stopping me from giving it 5 stars, but I would dare say that it is a 4.5. Next up, I listened to another audiobook, which was This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El Mohtar. So this was another sci-fi that was fairly short. I believe it was like 4 hours, 4.5 hours, and I gave this one 2 stars as well. Now, I absolutely love sci-fi. I love reading sci-fi, I love watching sci-fi, I love playing games that are sci-fi. I would definitely consider myself acquainted with the genre. So this book follows the story of 2 time travelers who write each other letters all throughout space and time, and we follow each of their stories. And this book is really beautifully written, and I believe that if you were to read it as a physical book, you would definitely enjoy it a lot more than reading it as a audiobook, just because the format in which it is written in is very unique. So they write each other letters, and we follow them throughout their missions in time, where they start to develop feelings and caring for each other, and they eventually fall in love. I really loved the concept, and I was absolutely sure that I'm going to love this book. But I had a huge problem with the fact that it was so incredibly confusing that I DNF'd it twice, but got mad at myself for not trying hard enough. So I pushed through barely and listened to the whole thing, and I am not happy. The things that I didn't like about it was that it was just trying so hard to be a science fiction, and I don't know, I should probably check the author and what kind of genre she usually writes, but I feel like she just gathered up a bunch of sci-fi words and just threw them in there so she would sound smart and versed in the genre, and it just felt pushed. It felt like she was trying really hard, and you can tell, and it just wasn't happening. So if she kind of edited herself down, I believe that this would have been a much better experience, at least for me. Or maybe I just felt dumb reading this book, and so now I'm taking it out on the author. But all that said, she does write beautifully, and the format in which it was written in, I presume that it's letters because I listened to it as an audiobook, but they read their letters out, and it was really cool the way that you would transition from one story to the letter of the other one. It was just very beautifully done, but again, it was just way too damn hard to read. So 2 stars, and I guess try it and see if it works for you. The next book that I read is Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna Maguire, and I have the Bulgarian cover and the Bulgarian version, which I think is very beautiful and I absolutely love it. It's very different from the original covers, but I just wanted to mention that because I really love covers. I am a graphic designer and these kind of things just kind of make an impression on me, so that's just what I wanted to mention. This book I gave 3 stars, and it is a pretty solid 3 stars. It is something I actually expected this to be a bit more adult than it was. I thought that it was going to be like YA or new adults, maybe like 17 to 20, but it definitely read more like 13, 12-year-old was the target group, and it's about a group of kids who traveled in magical worlds through magical portals, and they end up finding their way back to real life, I suppose. And they're trying to deal with the fact that they're no longer in the magical worlds. Some of the kids have a hard time adjusting to the world that we live in that is magicless, and their parents are very worried, thinking that they have some kind of trauma in their lives, and they send them to a group home that is supposed to help them get in touch with reality. There's quite a few books in this series. They're fairly short. In this one we follow Nancy, I forgot her name. In this one we follow Nancy, who came from an underworld, I suppose, and the undead world, and she is having a very hard time with being in a place that is very sunny, I suppose, and people are light, and she was used to standing still and being in the dark for a long time. I personally liked this book, and I would definitely give other books from the series a shot. I believe that every single one is going to tell the story of a different child and a different world and experience that they had, which is really cool. So I don't think they're connected, but they might be. I will give it a shot. I will get the next book and let you know if it's too connected to the first one or if you can read them separately. But I really enjoyed this one in particular because the main character, Nancy, is kind of reminded me of myself in my emo scene days. So I guess if I was a kid in high school and reading this book, I would have absolutely loved that. For me personally now, it didn't quite hit the mark, but it was still an enjoyable read. Next up, I listened to an Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson, and this one was another 2 stars for me. This is a romance fantasy. It is a standalone, and it was, again, not my cup of tea. There was a very similar thing here that happened in the Song of Achilles that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. This one I didn't DNF. I ended up finishing it, although I feel like if I hadn't finished it, I would have given it 3 stars, but having read through the whole thing, I gave it 2 stars. All in all, the book was kind of boring and a little bit slow. It dragged, and the main characters are very annoying in my opinion. We follow Isabel, who is a 16, 17-year-old girl who is living in a fae world, and she is very skilled with her craft. She paints portraits of fae folk who in exchange give her charms and spells to keep her safe or provide for her family. So she's supposed to be like 17 years old. She sounds in her head like a 30-year-old divorcee, and in reality she acts like an 11-year-old little brat. That's just my 2 cents of it. She was kind of annoying. I didn't really appreciate her character, even though the voice narrator was really good. The male love interest was also something that I didn't quite enjoy. The male romance interest is a fairy prince, and he is one of Isabel's clients. She paints his portrait, and she ends up painting his portrait in a way that is, I guess, disrespectful towards fae folk, and so he kidnaps her to get her to court and have her stand trial in front of the fae community. Naturally, upon their journey, they fall in love, and love between humans and fae folk is a taboo and it's forbidden, so they need to kind of navigate that whole situation. My main issue with the character, the prince character, Rook, he was made to seem like a naive little puppy, following her around and following her every whim, which is very similar to the experience I had reading Song of Achilles and the problem that I had with Achilles as a character. I realized that the dark, moody, morally gray male characters were all the rage a few years back, and I understand that people got tired of it and they went on to different tropes, but for some reason I am reading, like, this is what the second or third book that I'm reading that has come out recently that has a male character that is naive and dumb and just follows the female lead wherever, or like the romance lead, other romance lead everywhere, and just follows their every whim, and I really don't appreciate that. I don't know why it's needed to have one of the romance leads be dumb in order to elevate the intelligence of the other one, but that's definitely how it felt like in this book and also in the Song of Achilles. I understand that not everybody has the same mental capacity, and in romances sometimes one of the romance leads is a bit smarter, but these two, like Rook and Achilles, were very naive and very dumb, and they definitely felt like lost little puppies, and I definitely didn't enjoy it. It was just not my cup of tea. So I ultimately cannot enjoy and endorse a romance with a character like that. So that's something that I personally experienced, and that's my personal opinion. Of course, it's not going to be this way for anybody else. Everybody finds different things in different romances that work for them, but these types of ones just didn't. The reason why I read this book was because I have the other one, the other one by this author, which is the Sorcery of Thorns, and I'm really excited about reading it, or at least I was before I read this one. But I am going into it with lower expectations, which is not a bad thing, so we'll see how it goes. The last book that I read is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and I have found my 5-star read for this year. This is the book that I finished most recently, and I read this in June, and I absolutely loved it. It is my first 5-star of the year. This usually doesn't happen to me. I am quite stingy with my 5 stars, but I haven't been this stingy any other years, so I'm quite surprised that it took me 6 months to find a 5-star read. That is probably why I did a 5-star prediction video, because I wanted to hype myself up a little bit for some of the books, and I am going to try to read them as fast as I can, just because I want more 5-star reads. So this book follows the story of Nora, who is 30-something, and her life has not gone the way that she hoped or planned, and she is full of regrets. A horrible thing happens and she loses all hope in life, and she decides to kill herself. After killing herself, she goes into the Midnight Library, and the Midnight Library is a place between life and death where you go in order to get a chance to live all of the lives that otherwise you wouldn't. So she ends up redoing some of her regrets and seeing all of the different lives that she could have had she not given up on swimming, if she became a rock star, or if she got married to her ex-boyfriend, and all these other lives and all these other regrets that she ended up having in her life. Now this is a bit of a dark book at times, just because it starts off very dark, and it starts off also with the death of a pet, which is a huge thing that I need to mention, because it's not a spoiler because it happens literally on the 3rd page, but it is visited again a little bit further in, and that part is just so heartbreaking. That's the part that really got me. I am starting to tear up as I'm talking about it, but it was just very sad, and I would definitely just careful going in, be prepared for that. It gets a little bit better after some time, but still very sad. And yeah, that's sad. The beginning is very dark, and it ends up becoming progressively lighter and lighter, and it is very interesting looking at all of her different variations of different lives and how things would turn out. I would definitely recommend it, but if you're not feeling 100%, maybe don't start it and wait for a time where you feel better, because I did feel better, but all of the talk about anxiety and depression just kind of sucked me down, and I was feeling very good at the time, so I would definitely recommend reading this if you feel good. Like, if you're prone to indulging in dark thoughts, I would steer clear until I feel better. Definitely love that. This is going into one of my favorite books of all time, and I would definitely recommend it. The last two books that I'm currently reading are Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert and A House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. Now these two I am still in the middle of, so I won't be giving you too much of an opinion. The House The House in the Cerulean Sea is one that I am about 30 pages in, so I can't say absolutely nothing about, but tell you kind of where it's going. So in a world where there are some kids that have special abilities, we follow a administration worker who is sent to one of the group homes for kids with special powers or special abilities, and he's supposed to monitor what's going on and how things are going because the particular kids there are considered dangerous. So that's all I know. That's as far as I gotten. It sounds very interesting, and so far I love the writing and I love the humor in this because it has a very specific British humor, which I really enjoy. I don't know if the author is British, but I just really enjoy it so far, so keeping my fingers crossed that this will be my next 5-star read. And the last book that I'm going to be mentioning is Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. And I am about 60 or 70 even % into it. I am listening to it as an audiobook and I'm enjoying it, but also I'm kind of bored. So this is part of my romance outreach program for reading romance books, because I am trying to read some books that are different than sci-fi and fantasy, and I am dipping my toes into romance. This is highly regarded here on BookTube and people absolutely love it. And so far, like, it's good, but I'm kind of bored. I realized going into it that this is not going to be probably my story and my romance, just because I feel like I would enjoy the second one, Get a Hint, Danny Brown, I think, better, just because the romance trope or concept seems like more my type, but I guess we'll get to it when we get to it, if I ever get to it. But so far the Chloe Brown one is just good. It's cute. I enjoy the characters, at least nobody's dumb here. So I enjoy the characters and I like the romance, and I will let you know my final thoughts in about 6 months. So that's it for me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. I am going to be doing a mid-year wrap-up for my TV shows and movies that I saw this year up until June, so stay tuned for that. And for now, thank you guys so much for watching. Comment, like, and subscribe if you like what you see and would like to see more, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!